right? So as you go to the next, this is now the next layer of development of your ear, right? Because we have been focused on being able to tell between one difference between 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 7, right? Now go in further, but with a further distance from the each interval, where you're deciphering dissonant, modal, perfect intervals. Okay, so think of the 7 cycles, 4 cycle, 2 cycles per second difference of the dissonant, modal, and perfect interval, and focus in on that, right? Rather than, so even if it means you're naming, okay, you know what, this is a dissonant interval. I can't tell which of the two, but I would argue that if you can decipher which of the three it is, then you'll be able to actually hear if it's a one or a two, right? So as soon as you identify, oh, this is a dissonant interval and it's a one, right? So if you right now the software glitch is that you're unable to decipher, whoa, what is this, a modal interval or is this a perfect interval, right? So practice looking at the interval with a little bit more distance than you have been with each of the within each category, right? So that now you're really listening for deciphering which of the three is it? Is it dissonant, modal, or perfect? All right. And as you decipher that, you will be able to tell if it's a one or two or three or four or five or seven. All right. So focus on listening to which category it is first. Okay. And how do you practice this? Rachel.
Oh, I actually had a question, but I practiced it using like the software, the ear training software. But
Yep.
whenever I use the ear training software, it does question by question, and it's a lot slower, so it's a lot easier for me to distinguish intervals when it's slower and one at a time. But is there any tips on how to practice with like, rapid fire?
Right. So if you notice what I did this morning, I'm kind of establishing a pattern, right? So if I'm earlier when I was doing each section, I'm always doing 1 2 1 2 1 2 or 2 1 2 1 2 1 or 3 4 3 4 in that pattern, right? To give you a little more chance of hearing it in real time. Okay, so I think here's the thing about how we view our ability to decipher information, right? Too many times I think we assume is we need more time, right? Because time again after our teachers have told us, slow it down, break it down into smaller chunks. Now, I think that's absolutely true in terms of skill acquisition and technique acquisition, right? So if you have a given musical passage and you're trying to play it on your instrument, you do need to slow it down at a slower speed where you can decipher that finger. Okay, got it. Because if you try to skip that step and just try to do it in real time, you will get twisted up and you'll make the same mistake. Okay. But in terms of our ability to decipher things in real time, okay, our eyes are able to see the whole line. Our ears are able to hear the whole set. Okay, it's just that our translation of what that information is and verbally saying what that is, there's a bit of a backup. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to get you to do in terms of staying calm and relaxed and not make one of the three mistakes: reaction, anticipation, look back, right? All of those involve some kind of plugging up of the system where you are not allowing what your ears hear, what your eyes see, into identifying what that is, because your ears and eyes already heard it and saw it. Okay, just like in speed reading, your eyes actually deciphered the whole page. It's just that translating into what make into understandable information is where the plugging up is. Okay, so the way to practice this is to continue to work on all of the exercises we're doing, and we work on making sure we're not making one of the three exercises and plugging up and tensing up and blocking our logging of information that's coming into our brain. Okay, so and if you do that in a slow tempo, one at a time, then you're not actually practicing that. right? So in terms of hearing and deciphering notes and singing the dichords and solfege, you have to allow for real-time speed and kind of push you along. Okay, that's very different from learning to play a set of notes on an instrument. Okay, it's two very different set skills. All right, and I think most of us have been in a situation where our ability to hear and decipher things and say what they are, that ability hasn't been curated at all. All right, so you are not used to naming things. All right, you're not used to identifying things in real time and hearing things in real time, even though you can. Right? So all of these exercises are designed to give you a way to go through that blockage, go through that way of, I need to hear it slow it down. So that sense of panic, let it go. Okay. So the way you practice, what are some strategies you might use to strategize? So in terms of dichords, really physically relate to each interval, right, within each category, but also have a physical sensation in your body, in your hands, of what a dissonant dichord feels like, what a modal dichord feels like, what a perfect dichord feels like. So so one of the exercises that I do all the time is not only drawing the figure, the numbers, right? So the ones and 11 will have this edge around, the Marian-Ploger graph. Go to that. That's in your resource file. Okay, where it's really vibrant, shaking all around, and intense color, right? Whereas the modal is sort of much more gentler, right? And then the perfect intervals are very straight lines. Okay, and then you might even associate different kinds of word nouns and verbs, where the perfect intervals are very objective words. It doesn't have, it has very little emotional content. Where the dissonant words are like really provocative. It stirs intense emotion in you when you hear that word, right? And modals are a little bit, it's still subjective, but not as intense in terms of the power of the words. And within the dissonant interval, ones and twos, maybe one is more cutting and two is, oh, okay, wow, that's a powerful word, right? So that you start to have a physical association to these different intervals. Right. So when you hear it, when you see the color red, you have a reaction. People have a reaction to intense red, right? People have a reaction to sort of pastel blue, right? So in the same way, you should start to have a physical reaction to the intervals, right? Now, why? Because as musicians, as we make music, these intervals should mean something. When Bach uses a dissonant one versus a perfect interval, he's actually utilizing that language, that emotion that it stirs. Okay, when Beethoven, today when we looked at pastoral movement, he's stirring up a certain kind of emotion with all these thirds and sixes that are happening in the accompaniment. So then when he doesn't use a modal interval, then he's kind of stirring up the emotion in a different way, right? So composers, whether they might be actively using this relationship, physical effect of the dissonant versus modal or perfect intervals, maybe not. But I think if you listen carefully, you are able to see how the composers are using different intervals and how they put them together over each other in a very specific way, right? So for us not to access that part of emotive experience of music, where whether you hear dissonant or a perfect interval, your body doesn't feel any different reaction, then you're kind of being numb to that experience, right? So as a sensitive musician, you should have a physical reaction to a 1 versus a 7, right? So in identifying the dichords, it's not just a simple exercise. You're trying to put a very specific physical, active, emotional experience to that interval. Then it becomes clearer and clearer and you won't need extra time because now red is red, pastel blue is pastel blue. You don't have to think, is that red? Is that really red? I'm not sure, right? So in fact, much of your years of training where is actually hampering you in trying to identify the interval. A 5-year-old child will look at red and say, yeah, that's red. We don't like critically analyze what kind of red is that, right? So in a similar way, all the intervals, you can have an access to the kind of emotional content if you're sensitive to that, right? So don't treat these exercises as I'm just going to try to figure out what the numbers are, right? Try to really dovetail and connect what would be the action verb that I would assign to that dichord. Is it a very subjective, emotionally driven, red, intense one, or is it a objective, very straight, calm 7? Okay, all right. So the more you use your mind's imagination, mind's ear, right, to picture and really hear that dichord in your head without playing it on the piano, without singing it out loud, the more powerful your ability will be to be able to identify it when you hear it. Right. So take a walk outside and see the leaves changing, and depending on how intense the color of the leaf is, assign a dichord. All right, that's a modal dichord, or oh, that one's a dissonant dichord, and as a 1. Right? So I would argue Beethoven, when he walked around on his hikes with the sketchbook around his neck and he was writing, I think that's what he was doing. He was imagining singing in his head all these sounds. Right? I don't think he was singing out loud. I think he was imagining the sounds in his head. Right? So for us to be able to identify the dichords, the more you have a clear picture of what that sounds like in your mind's ear, the better your ability will be. Okay? All right. Yes, Rachel.
Just one more question. Whenever I practice hearing those things in my head, I really struggle with this really high upper ranges and lower ranges, but the middle ranges is okay. Like, is that normal? And
that's very normal because you're used to the range within your voice, the range within your instrument, right? In fact, I've often noticed that cellists, male singers they're really good at bass clef. Right, but then they get into treble clef and they can't do it, right? Violists who are so used to playing an alto clef, if you give them a bass clef, they're like, I don't know what you're doing, right? That world like stops at the C below middle C, right? So it's a matter of what you're familiar to, right? So if you're not used to hearing a particular range that's outside of your instrument or outside your voice type, then it gets harder to imagine that. Right? So obviously when you're in the extreme ranges of your voice or your instrument, then it gets harder to imagine what that actually sounds like because it's not like notes you've played 1,000 times, right? So it's a matter of strengthening the ability to imagine those ranges. Okay? Yeah, that's very normal. It's absolutely normal. Yeah. Okay. So what I did with let me share the screen with you. Where'd it go? A couple things. Where you all disappeared on me? Okay. All right. So I uploaded a couple files, and I want you to particular attention in helping you with the diverse composer assignment for your final project. And it's this one, the Edwin Fleischer collection, and then which I'll share, and then expanding the American canon. So I'll bring it down so you can see the pages. So this one is works of women composers, and in fact, later on when you have access to an orchestra and you want to program a piece, one of the biggest problem is rental prices of material is really expensive. But there's an amazing collection at the Library of Philadelphia. It's a free lending library. And in fact, if you so the background is it was founded by this philanthropist who gave a lot of money to start this club for symphony. And in fact, it was sort of a sight reading orchestra of amateurs. So this collection of music is available for orchestras to use. You just have to make sure that you put in the request well ahead of time, and then you have access to this set of parts for free. You just have to pay for shipping. So it has all these works by women composers. Okay, so this is sort of a great starting point to start where you get to know these pieces. Okay, so just a sheer number of works that are available immediately when you don't even have to pay rental, and many of these are not getting performed enough times. So that's one resource that you can explore. Okay, the other one is this is actually I think a doctoral thesis at the University of South Carolina by I don't know how to say his name, but Mr. Ekbo. And so it's a compendium of Black American orchestral composers. And in a similar way, he puts in the list of composers that should be known and should be in the canon. So there's a long paper, but then a whole slew of composers. So this is really a fantastic doctoral thesis, as doctoral theses go, very useful. Okay, so that's another point of departure for you to use in terms of trying to figure out which composers you want to pursue in that project. Okay, so really there's a couple of components in that presentation where you are really championing a piece of work by an underrepresented composer. So and then once you have done that research, okay, that's the piece I want to really champion, and then you do the presentation on the historical aspect, the performing aspect, and all of that. Okay, so I would start that now rather than later, because just the process of going through figuring out who and what piece you'll be championing, that'll really drive your rest of the presentation, right? So I would say really try to identify which composer and which piece will be in the next couple of weeks, right? And so these resources I'm giving you, you should utilize as a jumping off point. There's another resource that you should be, I believe I made aware of, but it's this Institute for the Composer Diversity, where it's you can, now the only problem with this one is it basically, if you put in a search database, a search parameter, it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about the piece itself, right? But there are some very useful things in this, here, let me go back to the first page, where they do season analysis of different orchestral seasons. And you can really see the kind of data points of the kind of works that are being played. Okay. So it's a not only the database, but there are many different research resources you can go to. Okay, so this is another great jumping off point to try to find out about different composers that are underrepresented. Okay, so you should, those three jumping off points should really give you ways to find underrepresented composers, right? And then go through the catalog and of their works and try to find out if there's a work that you would like to really champion. All right, so let's say you found a composer. Let's say you found, so this was a recent discovery of mine, okay? So Le Chevalier de Saint George, right? He's sort of the, everybody calls him the Black Mozart, right? And he was 1745 to 1799. And there are also documentation that he, during Mozart's travels, Mozart took lessons with Chevalier de Saint George. So let's say you found, okay, this is a composer that I would like to try to figure out what something by this person, this composer that I would like to explore, right? So then you might do a search with his name and then list of works, right? So not much have survived, but what have survived, a lot of it is available. So a lot of it is string quartets, is sonatas for violin and keyboard, violin concertos, symphonies. These are actually available on IMSLP. So if you click on his symphony number Opus 11, it's actually the complete set of parts, complete score, along with I believe there's a recording app available as well. So you can actually go and listen to the recording. Yes. And so on, right? So you can use one of the three initial resources that I gave you, and then jump in towards, okay, let's figure out who the composer that I want to figure out, and then go into further into a list of works by that composer and try to find something that's available, right? So obviously, as Amy asked before, you can find work that is not, it's in manuscript form and there's no recording available, but then that gets harder, right? But in some ways, that's much more exciting in actually scholarly work of discovering something that is not even performed by anybody yet, right? But that involves a lot of really imagination of hearing that piece and what that sounds like, okay? That's not required of this assignment. What is required is you finding a piece that you really, that really, I would love to champion that work and let the world know that everybody should know about this piece. That should be the main focus. Okay, all right. And so I put the three resources, wait. So this one, the Expanding the American Canon, and the Edwin Fleischer collection of orchestral music by women composers into our file resource. So you have it available for you. Where'd it go? Yeah, here. Right. So I'm adding to this set of resources that you have. Okay. All right. What I've also done with the assignments is I realized I should have done this earlier, but basically put the video assignments into a link. So I know some of you have emailed me the video links, but if you could put all of those into the appropriate place, then I can give you a grade. Okay. So if you would just put all the links that you've emailed me so far into a correct category of assignment, then I can give you a grade. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So we have a guest coming the next 3 Wednesdays. This Wednesday is Edwin Outwater. I will send you a link to his bio. He's the conductor at the San Francisco Conservatory. At one point, he was also the conductor of the San Francisco Youth Symphony, and he's a very well-known sort of up-and-coming conductor who's really wanted in a lot of places. So he's going to come and talk to us about his work at the San Francisco Conservatory, and there's quite a very interesting things happening at the San Francisco Conservatory. So he'll be talking about their acquisition of Opus 3, which is it's sort of an artist roster. So it's really interesting that a conservatory is joining hands with the artist roster group. They're also having this commissioning initiative, which I'm really interested about, where they're going to commission underrepresented composers. So he'll be here Wednesday talking to us about all of that. Okay. All right. So, and then the next week is Lawrence Lowe of the Symphoria in Syracuse, and then the week after that is Heather Buckman, who is the conductor at Hamilton College. So we'll have guests coming each Wednesday of the next 3 weeks. So which means we're gonna kind of go a little bit. We're not going to be able to cover all of the pieces, right? So instead of going to the next excerpt, which is this one, the Brahms Serenade excerpt, right? We're going to skip that one, okay? But we're going to jump right into Beethoven 6, Movement 2. And we're going to, this excerpt is a shorthand, of course, of this version. Where's the Beethoven? Okay. So I have sent you this link today before the beginning of the class. So let's talk about the Beethoven a little bit. All right. His Sixth Symphony is very unusual in that it involves trombones, but this movement does not, seen by the Brook. So it's flutes, oboes, clarinets, and B flat, bassoon, 2 horns. So it's a pretty small orchestra. So one of the challenges of this this movement is you're in a 4/4 pattern, but it's a legato triple meter, and there's always something happening that is going to pull you away from this. This triplet eighth of the 12/8. And then many times the melody wants to go slower and slower. And then dee da dee da dee da da dee da dee da dee da. This 16th note figure sort of pushes the tempo along. And there are always sort of the opposing forces between the melodic idea, da da dee da da dee, ya da dee da la da dee, da da dee da da dee. So many of this melodic contours and shape is that the melody wants to take more time, and it always wants to go slower and slower. La di da di, ya da da, ya di ya po. But then the accompanying lines of dee da 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 wants to have this very, very constant forward moving gesture. So keeping these two different kinds of energies in sync is very challenging. And then also you have this issue of how do you play the grace notes? How soon do you play? Da dee da 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 dee da. Whereas da 2 3 da 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 dee da. So those are things you have to make a decision on, right? Also, these trills in the second part, oftentimes the 32nd note is always early. So you have to really catch whether the orchestra is playing those in time or late or early. Okay, so what I would love to do is for us to go through the score together and then think about objective data gathering for a while, okay? And so then identify places that are challenging, right? Because what I want you to be able to do, and this is a much longer excerpt than all the other ones, right? It's almost not, well, it's much longer than, it's like 54 bars, right? So we might not be able to go through the whole piece today, but I would love for you to make a video of this for next Monday, right? And so today's the day sort of to really delve into the nuts and bolts of how to conduct and analyze and do this together, okay? So let me go into advanced sharing. So we're looking at, and then I'm going to optimize the computer sound. Okay, so let me close that. So right away, what you'll notice is this reduction that we see the string parts have pretty much stayed the same, but they're pretty much deletion of quite important lines. Sometimes it's represented, and sometimes it's not, right? So you have to kind of decipher that, right? The full score is available on IMSLP. So let me, oh, sorry. Let me go to IMSLP. And there are actually a couple versions, and I want to just take a little time to talk about a couple principles when you study a piece that is well documented, like Beethoven 6. All right. First of all, you're going to have access to many recordings. So I sent you this Haitink recording, but one of the things and the reason I'm using it because it is sort of a scrolling score, so it's very convenient for us to use. But I want to make sure that when you are making a musical decision process, it's always essential to start from the score without a recording, where you're making musical decisions and choices based on your study, right? And I can't emphasize how important that is. Dvorak 9 is a piece I grew up with when I was a kid. Like my uncle had it in the house. He had this Czech Philharmonic version conducted by Kublik. And I loved that recording as a kid. It was just something I put on all the time. And it's a piece where I basically learned it by heart without ever looking at the score, right? So there are certain rallentandos, there are certain things that this Kublik recording does that is not in the score. So there are random rallentandos, random crescendos. There are addition of trumpet part into the finale, which is not in the score. The opening horn call, instead of a 64th note, they play a 16th note, right? So instead of ba-ba, it's bum-ba. So I've learned this piece in such detail that is totally unrelated and different to the score. It was my first time to learn the score and actually conduct it with an orchestra, and I'm going through the study process, I was like, huh? That's not how it goes. What is going on with the score? And I started to realize all of these aspects of the scores where Kublik had made all these tradition choices that actually has nothing to do with the score. He just made a whole bunch of musical decisions that was not Dvorak's choice. In fact, Dvorak probably would have listened to Kublik's recording and was like, what the hell are you doing to my piece? And so, but then because I learned it with that, I can't erase it anymore. So whenever I do that piece, I fall into this trap of making these decisions that Kublik made rather than what Dvorak is asking for, right? And so that can easily happen if you start with the recording, right? So I would really plead with you, make musical decisions before you go to and refer to a score. Oftentimes, I think, and especially the advent of YouTube and the availability of pieces. In fact, when the Cornell Orchestra is doing a piece and I ask people to prepare for the summer, they immediately go and listen to recordings before they actually look at the parts. So then they're playing and making choices that are not in the score. So oftentimes I'm actually spending a lot of time in rehearsal clarifying, okay, actually there is no rallentando. I don't know why you guys are doing that rallentando. I know 5 different recordings do it, but there is actually no rallentando there. When we did Mahler 5, the Adagietto, everybody, half the orchestra loved the Bernstein recording. So they thought our tempo, which I was adhering to, based on the fact that I'm interpreting it as a love letter to alma mater rather than a funeral dirge, everyone was like, why are you going so fast? So please start from the score rather than from the recording. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ever use a recording. That's not my sort of extreme viewpoint either. I've met conductors who say, "Oh, you should never listen to recordings." Like, seriously? No, you use it as a resource, because once you've made a lot of decisions about the score and you have a very strong opinion about how things should go, and that at that point, it is your duty to go and find out and do research about, okay, let's hear what other conductors, other musicians have decided to do in these spots that I've struggled, right? You have struggled to make a decision. You've said, okay, I think this is the way to go. You've made that decision. Okay, now do research. All right, are you in line with majority of the conductors? Are you sort of the outlier? You've made a strange musical choice. Right. I used to think I was a terrible musician and I was an outlier, because based on the score, I would make decisions. And oftentimes I would do research, and like 9 out of 10 conductors are not doing what the score is doing. So I'm thinking, what am I missing? Right. So, but I don't know why that is. But I often find that I'm usually making decisions that I think is based on the score, but many conductors are just ignoring and not following. So I don't know why that is, but maybe you'll find the experience different. But anyway, so when you go to a piece like Beethoven, an amazing advantage is you have access to many different. So this one, for example, is a holograph of a manuscript. Now, why is this important? So it used to be you had to actually go to Bonn and visit the Beethoven House to be able to look at, or a library that had holdings. I don't actually know where the holding for Beethoven 6 is. The New York Public Library also holds a lot of manuscripts. They have a huge collection of Bartók scores. So when I was in high school, one of my research project for my English class was on the Bartók string quartets. That's how much of a nerd I was. But basically, I spent time researching in the New York Public Library, looking at Bartók manuscripts with a guard watching over my shoulder to make sure I'm not going to deface the thing. And that's when I realized, when you're able to look at the handwriting of Beethoven, right, it actually makes a big difference of the musical expression, right? It's one thing to look at a score that's typeset, and it's another thing to look at Beethoven's handwriting, and especially his the late string quartets. As he gets more and more frail, his handwriting gets more and more frail, right? So you get to see the tendencies of the composers, right? So it's really valuable to have that as an extra information. Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to go back. And another thing you have to be careful about, because which edition are you using, right? With especially Beethoven, there are many different competing editions that you can choose from. And so any composer who's going to be, how can I say this? Somebody of like Beethoven, Haydn, Mozart status, right? There's going to be hundreds of scholars pouring through the manuscript to make sure the editions are set right, right? So a piece like Beethoven 6 is going to have a Breitkopf and Hartel score from the 1820. There's going to be a 1863 print. There's going to be a Dover publication, which is sort of based on the earlier versions. This one in particular has so many errors that you shouldn't ever use that one. There's an Eulenburg edition of 1938. There is, and then of course, the most recent Breitkopf score. Let me see if I have it. Sorry, I don't have it with me. So there are editions called the Urtext, URTXT scores. So basically in the Urtext scores, what they'll do is anything that is not in Beethoven's manuscript and it's an editor's edition, they will bracket it so that you know which one is by Beethoven, which one is by editors. Okay, so something like uh, the Breitkopf will not have that distinction. Sorry, will not have that distinction. So we'll wait 13 seconds and go to the score. Um, so when you have a addition uh, that has all of the additions markings by the editor, and it is not necessarily by Beethoven, then you start to get into a bit of trouble in terms of deciphering which one was Beethoven's decision. Is that dynamic by Beethoven? Okay, so you have to be very have a critical eye of viewing the score and who the editor is, when when it was published, and whether all of these additional editorial decisions are in fact Beethoven's, and that can range from articulation, dynamic, um, um, any other extraneous things. Now, I think in terms of composers' markings, Beethoven became much more fastidious about marking what's on the page that are his, right? And then, of course, Beethoven to Mahler, there's a increasing degree of specific musical instruction. I mean, Mahler would have a paragraph of instruction to the conductor, right? And how Mahler function was, he would sort of finish the piece in the summer months when he's not working at the New York Philharmonic or the Vienna Opera House, and then he would try it out with the New York Philharmonic, and then that version that he's trying out is lacking many of the details, many of the dynamics are missing, many of the instructions are missing, and then once he's gone through with an orchestra, usually the New York Philharmonic, then he adds in a whole slew of information. And you can the way you can really see this difference is the Second Symphony of Mahler exists initially, the first movement, as a separate tone poem, and that piece has almost no dynamics, no markings whatsoever. But then in the Second Symphony, the same tone poem, pretty much exactly the same musically, same notes, same number of bars, but then there's about 10 times the amount of dynamics, 4 times the amount of instructions for the conductor, for the orchestra. So it's sort of an amazing example of Mahler's process, where he had a sort of a performing sketch, then he works with an orchestra, then he edits it with all of the additional instruction, right? So somebody like Mahler will be overscribing the performance direction. And Beethoven was much more fastidious in putting in information like dynamics and articulation, whereas Haydn and Mozart they really didn't give you a lot of help. They just assumed a lot of musicians who were playing their music. First of all, Haydn and Mozart had very different situations, right? Because Haydn was employed by Prince of Esterhazy, and he had a set of musicians he was always working with. So he sort of had a shorthand. He would write something, and more hairpins and dynamics, things like that, they would be just worked out in rehearsals. And they had such a good working relationship. They knew kind of what Haydn was looking for. Whereas Beethoven was always in a subscription, always working with a brand new set of musicians. So he had to really put down every direction. So really Beethoven was the start of a composer who are starting to dictate a lot more of the directions in terms of dynamics and articulation marking and instructions in the score, other than just notes. Okay, so let's go to the pastoral. And what I would love for you to do is, in the study process of this piece, I would love for you to at least know what's happening in the reduction. So when you look at this reduction, you're not sort of just looking at in terms of the 5 parts, but actually have an idea what the original score looked like, right? So that initially when da 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 dee da, that's played, right? That's in the first violin. but then later it's joined by the second clarinet or the clarinet, right? So kind of have an idea of what that color sounds like, right? And then here is joined by clarinet and bassoon, right? And that trill figure is actually not the second part, but the first violin, right? So da 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 dee da, and measure 7 and 8 is actually da 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 dee da, is actually clarinet bassoon, right? So have an idea as you go through the score what the parts are, right? So I'll make sure to send you this IMSLP score. Okay, right? Okay, what I would love for you to do is kind of start on this first page and deal with this issue of tempo. Now, Marc-Antoine Lécart didn't give us a tempo, but Beethoven did. So it's a really strange tempo, andante molto moto. What does that mean?
Like very, very walking tempo.
Yeah. So I think so. This movement is a second movement, right? So after sort of this fast allegro movement, right? Right. You have this scene by the brook, right? So, and it's supposed to be in the place of a slow movement, right? But rather than putting an adagio or some kind of slower tempo, he puts walking tempo, but then molto moto, right? So, and oftentimes, and this is what I mean by that whole rant about conductors choosing tempos that are, or making decisions that are not based on the score. So if I read andante molto moto, I'm not thinking a slow andante. I'm thinking, oh, okay, he wants to move a little bit, right? So, but then what you hear oftentimes is this tempo, bum bum pi bum pi, ya da da do di ya. Okay, so that's quite slow. But what's 50? Dotted chord equals 50. Anybody have that? Anybody have perfect tempo? Anyone want to guess 50? All right, here's 50. Even the Haitink example I gave you is a bit slower than this, right? So the Haitink example. Almost right on, but it's a tiny bit slower. Okay, so he's on the fastish side of most examples of the pastoral movement. Okay, so so that's the kind of detail you miss out if you just go from this score, right? Because it doesn't give you a tempo, right? And so a lot of times, I really appreciate the excerpt that he's given us, right, to work with. But I think some scores you actually have to go back to the source and figure out, okay, what was the initial tempo directions, right? Right. Also, if you look at the grace note, now correct me if I'm wrong, but in the original score, it's 16th notes, right? Versus the 8th notes that Marcon has given us. So if somebody puts a grace note with 16th note versus 8th notes, our interpretation will be very different, right? If I see 8th notes, da 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 dee da, like here, da da dee da 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 dee, I might do that rather than here, da da dee da 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 dee, a little bit faster, which is what I think Haitink is doing. Let me just. Right, so that's a pretty sprightly 16th note, grace note figure. Okay, another thing Haitink is doing is that in Beethoven's time, if you have a slur under a set of notes, how would musicians interpret that?
Like legato.
Legato, okay, that's I think that's more of a modern concept. Okay, in Beethoven's time, if you have a slur on the set of notes, that would have been described, that would have been assumed as a dissipation of energy. Body, 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 right? Rather, so if you think of a legato idea, the modern idea is dia, biappa, biappa, right? So we emphasize longer idea, right? But what Haitink is doing, listen to the grace notes a little bit. Dia, dia, dia. So that the third note is almost a tapering. Right? And then he's sort of using so that second note of the second figure, F G F, F E flat D, D C B flat, right? He's sort of leaning on that, right? D D this way, right? And in the similar way, da yada di da ta di. So the emphasis, even though the B flat is longer, is not da da di da da di, but yada di da ta di. It's on the C, the eighth note C on the downbeat. Da da di da ta di, because it's a suspension from bi da 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 ta, right? So it's really important to know that tendency of musicians to interpret that as dissipation of energy under a slur. Di da 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 ta, di that's kind of an important idea, right? That's not in the score, right? There is no hairpin or anything like that, but it would have been assumed as general practice by Beethoven's musicians, and Beethoven would have also assumed that, right? And he would have put something contrary if he wanted something different. Okay, all right. Another thing that is lacking is this. My favorite bass pizzicato note, right? There's no bass pizzicato, but this bass pizzicato is really, really important, right? Bum, bum, B. Ah. My mouse is too sensitive. Okay. Also, notice that the celli, soli con sordini, what does that mean?
Like with a mute?
With the mute, yeah. Okay. We are lacking all of that information, right? So it's really important that you actually have, when we're trying to conduct, in terms of our beginning process, we're sort of getting through the gesture, the right kind of beat, but also all of our gestures are meant to show color and musical intent, right? So this becomes a very different downbeat when you don't have a pizzicato versus here when you do have a pizzicato, right? So you have to convey not only the melody, not only the this idea, but boom, boom, right? So all of these kind of vocabulary of trying to show the music, it's hard to do when you are lacking a lot of the information. Also, look at the horns, right? They're having this, it's in B, right? So it's basically outlining the pizzicato resonance, right? So not only do you have the pizzicato sort of resonating, but the horns are supporting that pizzicato resonance, right? So in this score, we're lacking that whole picture, and we're focused on biappa, 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 right? Okay, couple more things. We have a piano. Let's see, piano. Okay. So here, we have a crescendo for a bar, forte piano, crescendo, diminuendo piano. And we're missing that info, right? So crescendo, forte piano, forte piano, crescendo. And this bar is really important. Well, I guess he did it with hairpins instead. Right? So what's the difference between hairpins and crescendo? Is there a difference?
Crescendo's a little less specific about timing.
Well, I would argue in terms of timing, it's not, he's pretty clear, right? Everybody has forte piano and then crescendo in the second beat or the third beat, right? So in terms of that, I could be nitpicking, right? But I would argue that hairpin versus crescendo is actually two different kind of expression. Hairpins can be within a dynamic, right? I think crescendo is a little bit bigger than that, right? But that's, of course, that's subjective, right? So you have to kind of look at how Beethoven used hairpins versus crescendo, right? Also, the forte piano in Beethoven, I think the misnomer is people think of it as a big moment, right? But when he wants a big moment, he uses sforzando rather than forte piano. So I think forte piano is within the context of piano, right? Okay, let me go a little bit further. So whenever you have a passage like this, so this is, this crescendo happens second time. There's another forte piano, another crescendo, diminuendo back to piano. Okay, so is it exactly the same as the first time? This time versus this time. Versus right there. So the first time, the melodic line is only in the first line. Right? Second time, the melodic line is now in the clarinet bassoon. First time, everybody's pretty much on the downbeat. All the accompanying lines. Bum, 2, 3, 4, and a 1. Second time, we have a little more variety of the horns have bum, ba, 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 bum, ba. Plus the first violin has is 1, 2, 3, there I am, there I am, there I am, right? On those, this trill turn, half a turn, right? So it's a little more intense, I would say, as opposed to the first time, which doesn't have the syncopation or the third eighth note of a beat, doesn't have the there ya, there ya, there ya in the first violin. So when you think about dynamics as an architectural aspect structure, it's structure. Sorry, let me say that again. Dynamics is structural, especially in Beethoven. So he doesn't ever do things that are unimportant, that's not marked by, he always does something important marked by dynamics. Right? So if you see dynamics, you know that's an important moment. Okay? When you have these two repeating passages, the second one is more intense than the first one. So you have to kind of build a structure that way. In your conducting gesture, you can't have this bar be too big so that the second time when this comes, it either sounds the same or there isn't a difference. Okay, so now out of that first crescendo, here in the third bar, right here, it's piano, da, 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 which is the second time that melody is being heard, right? So after the crescendo, instead of 2 bars of piano, now we have 1 bar of piano dolce, and then crescendo, and then the back down. Piano, and then another crescendo, and then a back down. So it's sort of this building waves coming in and coming back, coming in, coming back. And then goes to pianissimo for the first time in the piece. And then stays pianissimo, well, actually, pianissimo for 2 bars on the beat, and then goes to piano here, right here. And that stays piano without crescendo for quite a long time. And in fact, until this point, it's all piano. All right, so let's listen to that. And I'll kind of talk you through. Okay, here we go. One thing that I'm noticing in a lot of the videos, everybody, is that your left hand is too sympathetic to your right hand pulse. Try to really pick a left hand gesture that is musically specific and not related to pulse. Okay, so you might assign something color or a particular cue or dynamic, right? But having the try to do not that, but and I'm sort of pits something like that, where your left hand is assigned a very specific musical idea that is not related to pulse, right? Because there's a lot of mirroring going on where the left hand begins to lose any kind of definition or meaning, right? If it's going all the time, nobody's watching it. Okay, all right. Listen to the 30-second note. It's a little early. That's still early. 4, 5, 6, carabam. And That's a spot where every violin section wants to do a huge crescendo because it feels so nice in their hands. And this part, he says dolce. And Beethoven says, hold the sound. And then now crescendo. But oftentimes they all go, my little pet peeve. Isn't there 8 notes in the horn? Oh, this is hard to show. This accent on the second eighth note of each beat. Ya, tia, 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 ba. So you have to do kind of the syncopated. Tia, tia, bam. You have to catch it on the rebound. Everybody, let's try that. And 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, as opposed to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. It's like okay. Yeah, so here, these 16th notes, this is much better shown in actually the Thekar, because he actually spells out the yapapapapapam, yapapapapapam. Now, if you're not clear on the upbeat to the 16th notes, it'll never be together, right? So yum, bum, bum. Oh crap! Right? So 1, 2, 3, ba 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 bia, ba 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 tia, ba 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 ba. So either you have to show the dotted quarter before the 16th note, exactly 2, 3, ba 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 ba, or you show the eighth pulse, which is a little bit messy. 1, 2, 3, ba 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 be, beep 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 be, ba 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 ba. And that's unfortunately how most people do it, right? Because they're trying to yum, beam, bum, ba 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 ba. So rather than yum, beam, ba, ba 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 ba. Does that make a difference? Can you see the difference, right? So because it's ending of a phrase at 18, right? 1, 2, finish. Right? So it's two different ideas, two phrases, right? One ends, 1, 2, 3. So uh, I also saw a lot of people really not making too much change when the musical energy is different. And this is a moment where musical energy is very different. 18, first 3 beats is end of a phrase, very calm, finishing. And then active, active, active. So you have to really show an active passive conducting in these two cases. Okay. So look at the first violin part here, right here. That B flat versus the 16th note F is two very different animals. Is of this world, second viola and cello. Right? So B flat is of this world, and the melody is still so this note and this figure is actually one musical idea as opposed to this world. So what's important is to not make this but so somehow through the rest you're connecting this B flat to this yeah. So this is a repeat of that initial melody section, right? But now we have this offbeat figure and the horns and the bassoons. B, two, B, right? So that indicates to me this idea of molto idea. Because if it's too slow, this syncopation, the horn bassoon part doesn't make sense anymore, right? So if anything, I think the tempo should move a little bit more in this section. And of course, here, the second violin and the viola and cello part is now much more of a second musical idea, right? Whereas before in the beginning, it was less melodic and more and this idea. And over here, so it's much more accompanimental, much more Alberti bass-like. But now here, it's taking on a second melody characteristics of having a little more prominence. Means more involved syncopation. Bum bum pi, bum bum pi, bum bum pi. So that's sort of a remnant from the first movement idea. That's sort of reimagined in the second 12/8 figure. Okay. One of my favorite moments of the whole symphony, where the first violin suddenly says, I'm going to be in in 16th note, 16th note, 16th note, 16th note. Oh, what? Right? Rather than 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Right? Give the bassoon the melody? What? Is he crazy? So what most people don't realize is it's not just the bassoon, right? It's bassoon, violas, and cello on the second time. Because the first time is just the bassoon here, on the right here. Only the bassoon, right? And then Beethoven thought, yeah, that's crazy. We gotta help the bassoon out. So now he doubles with the violoncello there, right? And that color difference is really important, right? So let me just go back a little bit. Just bassoon alone, and then so what I love how Haitink has done is that first bar when the violas and cellos join, you hardly even hear it. But then as the crescendo is nearing, he allows them to bloom the color a little more, right? And that transition of bassoon alone, and then rather than bassoon for 2 bars and then violoncello all of a sudden takes over the texture, he decided to do a gradual shift where the color change is more subtle, and we hear, oh, that now something else. Oh, there's the whole lower strings, right? And so that's sort of kind of a beautiful transition of color. Harned is added. Was added. First flute is added. Second flute is added. So now he did something here that I really don't appreciate because I think it's quite musical, okay? But this bar, where instead of a 12/8, now we have all some duples, right? So how do you conduct this bar? Do you stay in da'im, 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 da'im? Or do you actually diam, 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 bam, biam, biam, bam? What do you do? If you were in the orchestra, what would you like the conductor to do?
The first option was clear to me.
I think so, because once you start doing this, and oftentimes I played in orchestra, and I would sing in choirs as well. And oftentimes the choir directors that I had always subdivided more and then try to give the music, right? In the sense that dam, 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 like this, right? Rather than dam, 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 da, right? Because that rub, that sort of friction of, oh, okay, this is 2 against 3, right? That aspect was canceled out if they just go into 6. Dam, 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 rather than d, 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 bam, b, bam, b. So that friction, that 2 against 3 has to be felt by the orchestra, right? So I'm always sort of advocating for making clear what the composer is doing. And here he is not doing some weird change of meter. It's a 2 against 3 feeling that we want to emphasize, right? It's a diminuendo. It is not a rallentando. We're not in Russia. We don't have to always get slow if we're getting softer, and we don't always have to get louder when we're getting faster. So try it out without doing this additional massaging of tempi when you have diminuendo, or because the big temptation is, as Haitink has done in this case, to, oh, there's a diminuendo and it's weird, so I'm going to slow down. Well, what you have just done is cancel out this feeling of 2 against 3. All right, so let's listen to it again. That doesn't sound like a 3 against 2, 2 against 3, right? It just sounds like we have 2 and 2 b, 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 bam. All of a sudden it sounds like a 6/4 bar, right? Okay. Now, what does that do to this bar, the piano diminuendo? Because Beethoven has already written in the slowing of the harmonic pulse of the musical pulse, right? D stasis. Stasis. So it's already written in without having to write in more rallentandi into this moment, right? How beautiful is that? This second violin viola part, da da di da, ba ba pipa, ba ba pipa, is coming from that initial melodica, ya da di da da di, right? But now it's sort of made a different musical figure. Oh, and look at this crescendo. For the first time, we have a crescendo, not coming back. Now it goes in full-fledged forte, and it stays forte. As the instrument and a sforzando instead of a forte piano, right? Why are you slowing down there, right? So I think he's sort of bump, bump, B. Maybe you're placing the note. I really don't know. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why that rallentando's there. Crescendo violoncellos. Back to a second place pianissimo, right? So I kept you 6 minutes over. I'm so sorry, guys. I got kind of excited about Beethoven. But that gives you a good start of all the lots of different issues to deal with in this Beethoven excerpt. Okay? All right. So Wednesday, we will have Edwin Outwater as our guest. So bring some questions. I will send you links to his bio, so please read up on him a little bit. And then please put the links into all of the right places so that I can give you a review and actually give you a grade in the right places. Okay? All right.
Thank you. I actually have a quick question.